Today's live show is sponsored by Uffizzi. Stand up your developer platform in minutes with Uffizzi. The Uffizzi platform provides fast provision Kubernetes clusters for all your dev and testing needs. Every engineer gets self-service, sandboxed virtual clusters. Every team can have centralized management of those clusters. It runs on their infrastructure or yours. Uffizzi has deployment support for Helm, Kustomize, Kubernetes Manifest, and even Docker Compose. Their management platform has features such as sleep mode, time-based deletion, and resource quotas for avoiding overspending. Try their free starter tier today by spinning up your first sandbox cluster in under a minute at uffizzi.com. Hello? Are we live? I am Bret. This is my show. And I'm here yet again on another Thursday with you. And I've got this giant new, it's distracting. a giant pop filter. It is the world's largest. Look at that little tiny microphone in this. It's big. Okay, we're just gonna have to deal with it because I have plosives. If you're into the whole audio thing, and I don't want a plosive in your ear on a podcast, so I have this now. It's even bigger than the ones I had before. You're welcome, Internet. All right, so this is my. I didn't say this anywhere in the description, so welcome, because this is the DockerCon prep show, or the pre-DockerCon prep and discussion show. So if you're here from the courses, thank you for showing up. You probably got an email. It's always crazy every time we do this every month for the course Q&A, because Udemy lets you send out emails. And I now have over 310,000 students, which means I think it's like 300,000 emails every time I invite people on the show. And a few of you show up. So thank you for being here. I'm here for you this week. Sadly, I am not joined by the wonderful Nirmal Mehta. He is prepping for DockerCon as well. We will both be there next week in LA. And probably are going to have some tacos. Maybe go for a hike. This is a joke from a show called Letterkenny, in case you're a fan of Letterkenny in the out of Canada, that's a pretty great show, but they make fun of LA because it's got tacos and hiking. So good tacos. So I'm going to be there next week, and I'm going to be talking about. I've got 4 different presentations / hallway track organizing bird of a feather things. We're going to be live next week from DockerCon talking about the announcements. Now, if you didn't know. If you're someone who's been lucky enough to go to a KubeCon or a Kubernetes Community Day or any other container cloud native ecosystem thing, DockerCon is a bit like a more exciting. It's a vendor show, so I'm trying to figure out how to say this. When you go to KubeCon, there's not real. Everything's open source there. Well, almost everything. We have some things that are not open source, and you can pay to play at KubeCon. But you don't really get announcements like, surprise! We did this thing in secret, now you know! That doesn't really happen at KubeCon, which is a shame because it kind of makes the keynotes, yeah. So it's kind of, I guess in DockerCon might be a little bit more like an Apple conference, WWDC or something, or I'm not going to say a reInvent because I don't know. I'm never really excited about the next new service on Amazon, but that's just me. I'm jaded in the cloud after 15 years of cloud announcements. So DockerCon, I'm kind of expecting some things. I kind of know a few things, and I'm not going to say till next week. But DockerCon historically, for better or for worse, has done things in private, even if it might be open source. They'll have it closed source, and then they'll open it up. So if you look over the history of the 10, what are we on now? This is the 11th year of DockerCon. And there's sometimes been multiple DockerCon, so I guess we're probably close to 20 now. Historically, Docker has released stuff like that, and it doesn't always go well because they do things like take the Docker engine repo and they change it to Moby, which was confusing to people. It made sense to us on the inside, but for the average person who never really needed to mess with source, usually was very confused by that. Things like Swarm mode, also Swarm Classic before Swarm mode. Those things were announcements. Docker Desktop was a surprise announcement. So we tend to get something at DockerCon, again, for better or for worse, because it's also horrible on the engineers that are working on it because they have this deadline that's kind of arbitrary that they have to ship. Of course, nowadays, that's why we call it vaporware, because a lot of times things are announced before they're even existing. And sometimes, even at DockerCon, those things never actually materialize. That's happened several times before. So I'm excited about next week because I think Docker is starting to get their legs. Like they've had a rough time finding profit, different ways of enterprise business, splitting the company in 2019, then the lockdown, these things have been challenging for them. And I feel like they're at profitable, they're at a point of profit where they're growing their profit. They've made public announcements. There's also been some sort of leaked disclosures around, I don't know, 80 million, 100 million, something like that a year revenue. And we're starting to see them just rapidly add minor but features nonetheless. Docker Desktop, Compose. You've seen me locally, at least on this YouTube. I've been releasing a few little shorts, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes because I got some more announcements. Some shorts on things like Compose Watch, which just hit GA. So expect your next Docker Desktop release, whenever that's going to be, to have the open source updated 2.22 version of Compose, which will now have Docker Compose up, and I think it's -- watch or just Docker Compose Watch. Basically, it's a way for it to watch your files, sync them into your container, which means you don't have to bind mount your code. I mean, we have been doing this with other tools. Docker Sync, what's the one that Docker just bought? Someone's going to remember this in chat. Starts with an M. Mutagen. Docker bought them. There's been at least a dozen attempts in various ways of avoiding cross-OS file delays in bind mounts of Docker ever since Docker Toolbox back like in 2014, 2015. And not that we've solved it for everyone. That's not what's happening here. But if you haven't heard the announcement or seen the shorts, Docker Compose, still my best and favorite local developer tool. And there are an increasing number of other developer tools, particularly focused on either remote development or Kubernetes, which I still think are both niches, and that the majority of people still prefer local development and still prefer simple tooling that doesn't require them to boot the world simply to develop on a single application. So that's what Compose is. And now Watch, which we can get into. If you have questions, put those in chat. There's a short in this channel, but don't leave yet. I can show you live now. I don't even have the release version, so I'd still have to show you the alpha stuff. But it allows us basically to push code in, sync it essentially just one way for now, one way from your host in your container. So these are all things that are constantly happening this year. So long story longer there is I expect more of that at DockerCon. So stay tuned next week. I'm also going to be doing a talk. My new Mac update has me confused. My talk next week will be the third time I've done this talk on Node.js and Docker and sort of the updates. I will particularly go into things like Docker default, your base images and the selection process you need to make on basically any application, or particularly any JIT, so just-in-time compiled applications. So we're talking Python, Ruby, Node, PHP, those languages that that don't have a compilation process before they're put into the container. So all of those typically have large, complex base images that you have to deal with vulnerabilities. So my talk, more and more these days, tends to talk about the status of all that, the default nodes, the options for distroless, Wolfie. I'll be talking about that this year. So if you can't attend DockerCon, that talk will eventually make it on the internet. And if you're on my newsletter, you'll hear about that. You'll know when that comes out. So let me give you a couple of updates. By the way, hello, everyone. We've got Martin here, faithfully, reliably, coming from the Netherlands every week. I really appreciate it. We've got PCS from Toronto. Nice. I love Toronto. That's a great city. I have walked around that place a few times, and I've sailed in the bay. What bay is that? Someone look that up on a map. What bay is that in Toronto? I've had little boating trips with a friend of mine who's a captain, and I'm a faithful swabby sailor that goes along with that and tries to pretend I know how to sail. By the way, just because you're in the Navy doesn't mean you know how to sail. They don't teach you that unless you're in officer school, and even then, they don't really teach you how to sail. They teach you a couple things, but anyway, we got Mark here in Utah and new to the course. Fantastic, Mark. Good luck. I'm assuming when you say the course, you mean Docker Mastery, which is definitely my most popular. Pro Cheeseburgers here with the fresh PR on the Swarm repo. So if you didn't know, if you didn't know, we have an awesome Swarm. So if you're still a Swarm fan, congratulations. You I think, successfully dealt with the hype cycle of Kubernetes, and you stuck with something that you liked. Or if you're trying it out, just know that it's still a viable option for what I would really like to say is, like, right now today, this is mostly for, to me, Swarm is because we don't have a lot of options for storage and storage across nodes. I still prefer it for stateless services. It's not wonderful and great for running databases in a highly fault-tolerant way unless you are okay with sticking those volumes on nodes and then having replication inside the database across nodes. Like, there are ways to all do it. And of course, now we have this new storage support, the CSI support, but that's very kind of an alpha preliminary stage. So if you're sticking around for Swarm, fantastic. We have a Swarm list for all the things that are current in Swarm. So one of the challenges with Swarm is it's come and gone in popularity, and it's now sort of the, I might not say resurgence, but we've got a nice, wonderful little Discord community in my Discord server. Thank you to all you maintainers, by the way, that are moderators rather, that help. If you didn't know, go right up there. That's my sound effects. Go up there to devops.fan, and that is the Discord server. That's where all the action at. If you're in the courses, you should definitely be in there. I would say that I'm probably a little more reliable in answering the questions in the courses on Udemy if you're taking one of those. But very quickly, I try to check here, if not every day. I probably need to set up a notification just for this channel. I should say in Docker Mastery, show me all messages. And there we go. There we go. So that way I get notified when you ask questions in courses. So we do that. This is nice because if your question is complicated, we can have a real-time chat. Can't do that in Udemy. I've been asking for that from them for years, maybe 7 years now. I've been saying, please make some sort of live chat option in Q&A, or at least make Q&A allow me to not have to refresh the page manually to see replies. Like, make it WebSockets or long polling or something so that we have that. So anyway, jump in there. People ask questions in the course, but of course you can always ask in Udemy. I try to check every day, even weekends, and on occasion I actually get help with that, but it's usually just me. And I also like to know, like, what are issues people are having in the course. I used to outsource a lot of the Q&A, especially during COVID when we were all in lockdown. Man, people were just taking those courses like crazy. I was getting 50 to 100 questions a day. I couldn't handle it all. So luckily I had people to help, but that has definitely slowed down. So anyway, Costa Rica. Nice, Charlie. What's up? Conrad's back as always from San Francisco. I'm sad actually that we're not going to be back in San Francisco for DockerCon, which they did that in 2018 and 2019 because the headquarters is in San Francisco. But their team, obviously just Docker like everyone else, their team is highly distributed now, even more so. So San Francisco, I mean, I think they have an office. I think they've moved. I don't even know anymore what the status is of Docker headquarters. So sadly, we're not back in San Francisco, also, but that would be an awesome meetup. If Conrad, if we were back in San Francisco, I would look you up. So love the extensions in Docker. Yeah, so extensions are like a playground for Docker. What I've noticed is they don't always add features to Docker Desktop for things that you maybe don't care about, like the volume plugin, which is one of my I kind of claim fame to the original idea of that. But I made some scripts to help you back up and restore volumes or put them in images and store them in registries so you could actually move your volumes around. And Docker took that and made a whole extension from it. And it, to me, really should just be a feature of Docker Desktop. But that's what's great about the extensions is you can easily install them. Some of them are lightweight. Some of them are not. I really wish you could be able to like sort of disable plugins without uninstalling them or sleep plugins individually. If you haven't tried Docker Desktop in a while, they just got they've got multiple now sleep modes. So it will automatically go and put the VM to sleep now if there's no containers running, saving resources. It now has an option for you to manually put it to sleep, which works. I believe that works even if you're running Kubernetes. There's a little catch with the sleep stuff if you're running Kubernetes, because technically in the background, Kubernetes is always running containers because that's what the control plane is. So if you manually put it to sleep, there's actually a bug I think they've got on their list to fix where it looks like it's not sleeping, but it really is. Anyway, I love the energy resource saving on that. I wish they'd have done that 5 years ago. But it's continuing to get better, thinner. Ironically, some competition to Docker Desktop in recent years, I think, has forced them to up their game and to reduce the footprint and memory, to make the storage more efficient, rather, to make it go to sleep. Like, we've got these multiple sleep modes now. And that, I think, is a lot of times coming from not only their internal team just wishing it would do these things, but also external competition. Always a good thing for companies. It keeps them focused. And whatever, Orb Stack or whatever that one is called, making some waves right now as an alternative because it's so lean and mean. And it doesn't use Electron. It uses native Mac APIs and programming inside of probably what I would assume is Swift, where Docker uses Electron, which is known to be more memory use, CPU resource intensive. And I kind of wish they'd go native, but then that'd mean they'd have to make 3 native versions for Mac, Windows, and Linux. So I can see why they're not doing that and that they're doing Electron. Anyway, Dan is here from St. Louis. I'm so sad that I haven't been in recent years, and also this year, to St. Louis for the final. Let's just take a moment of. That's not the right one. That's not the right sound. Let's take a sad moment for. What was the name of that conference in St. Louis? Strange Loop, which I only got to attend once back in like 2016, but it was a wonderful community conference. I'm sad that this is their last year, and I wanted to go, but they weren't doing workshops, and I didn't have enough reasons to go, and they weren't going to pay me to be there. So it's always tough as an independent content creator to pay your way to conferences when they're not able to pay you. So, or at least, cover your costs. So it was sad. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I would have loved to meet up, Dan. Michael is in Knoxville. What's up? Knoxville, another place. Tennessee's generally, I just haven't been to Tennessee. I don't even think I've actually been there overnight. I've driven through there multiple times, traveling throughout the country, but I need to go and do some Bourbon Trail stuff. I don't know if you're a fan of the brown drinks, but I've definitely been to Kentucky, mostly because when you drive from the East Coast west, you go through Kentucky. So we always try to hit a tour or a distillery there. What do I think about having traffic ambassador Brian Christner, another Docker captain, on the live show? Yes, Dan, we have had Brian multiple times on the show. In fact, he was on within the last year. Brian was on, and we talked about what did we talk about? We talked about getting jobs, and basically he's a hiring manager at a tech company over in Europe, and we talked from his perspective of what does it take to get into DevOps? What is he looking for to hire when he hires DevOps engineers or people with DevOps skills? Maybe they're more of a programmer or an operator, but they have these necessary DevOps skills. So we didn't talk a lot about traffic, but yeah, I'll reach out to him on that. Again, I don't think I'm going to see him at DockerCon next week. Sadly, I don't remember hearing that he was going. I don't know that for sure, but I will reach out to him. He's a great guy. I actually saw him when I visited Lucerne, Switzerland, and we hung out for an evening, and he took us out to dinner. Thank you, Brian, by the way, for that. That was a wonderful evening, very special, great memories. But yeah, he's a great guy. Love to have him on the show again. And Vancouver, man, we are killing it with the Canadians today, which is ironic considering I mentioned Letterkenny, and we got 2 Canadians, and I was making Letterkenny jokes at the beginning of the show. All right, people, so here's the rules. you have questions, I can make up answers. Hopefully they are correct. So ask those questions now before I get rambling and focused on different topics that I'm working on. So I have a couple of things to share. One of those is, if you didn't hear earlier, we have DevOps.fan, almost 16,000 DevOps professionals and people learning DevOps, doing that in that Discord server. I love that place. I hang out there every day. It's my fans. It's my friends. It's everyone all together. And I learn so much from y'all. So I love hanging out in there because there's some faithful companions on there posting stuff every day. I basically don't have to go to Reddit or Hacker News anymore because all of the DevOps and particularly Docker and Kubernetes stuff, people are in there talking about it. It's great. I feel like we've built a nice little community there of people just talking about all the stuff that I love. And yeah, so go over there, join, say hi, please say hi, let everybody know you're there, and get involved. All right, so DockerCon is next week. If you didn't know, it is free to watch remotely. So if you go to the program, you will have the sad news that my talks are not going to be live. So in person only. So you can't watch some of these like mine right here. This one. So my expectation is that it'll be on the internet eventually after the conference. But it's an update to this talk that I've given multiple times before. If you just search around the internet for Docker Rocks in Node.js, in case you're a Node.js fan, I would say almost all of the things I teach in that course are applicable, that talk are applicable to other ecosystems like that are JIT compiled languages. So you got PHP, you got Python, you got Ruby, you got Node, you got these kind of languages where a lot of the same concerns, right? You need to bind, mount, source in, and watch files for rebuilding or doing things locally. You've got to install packages, often with the host package manager as well as your programming package manager, NPM in this case. You've got to worry about CVEs. You've got to be able to scan. You've got standard Docker sort of multi-stage Docker concerns that really don't change throughout all these languages. But you can technically just watch this talk and then anytime I say Node, replace it with Python. Anytime I say NPM, replace it with pip. There's very similar concerns in all different stages. I'm probably going to cover the Kubernetes pod spec that I recommend that includes all the features that you're going to need in your own Kubernetes pods. Every pod you run, there's a set of concerns that aren't there by default you need to deal with. And quite honestly, all this stuff is really already in my GitHub. I have tons of repos. So if you're not familiar with all this stuff, you just go to github.com/Bret Fisher, and you will get a nice little page there listing all of my examples. And there are things there like Kubernetes pod specification. This is kind of small. You can't even see that. Kubernetes pod specification recommendations. Kubernetes init container examples, which is a pretty common thing when you maybe need to seed a database, right? I love that example, especially if you're in dev and test and you're rapidly spinning up things and seeding databases all the time, or you're in production and you need to do a database schema update. Like that init container is a great example of how to do that. There are maybe better ways in some cases, depending on your solution, using jobs, but a init container is also another way to do it. You have to be a little bit careful when you have multiple replicas because you don't want scripts automatically all trying to update the database together at the same time. So you tend to have to do a little bit of intelligence in there, but these all work, right? And then there's the Node.js Rocks and Docker, which is the talk I'm giving this year. And yeah, this is the one I did for it last year, which was a virtual conference. So it was a shorter talk. It was only 30 minutes, but it was highly edited, right? So it's bang, 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 bang. Whereas when I talk in the real world, it's longer talks, but we don't get it edited. So I do ramble and I have lots of filler words like and yeah and so. Those are all edited out of this video. Anyway, so something else. is updating to that. And related to that is, no, we don't want that one. We want this one. So thanks to Eric. I don't know if he's in here today. One of the high fivers. He helped me update this list. So what this is, what you're looking at is the node image. And this is really something you can take to just about every other image. Again, any images where you need a bunch of dependencies and the runtime. So Node, PHP, Python, Ruby. Even in some cases, you really need that also for .NET and Java. So you have decisions to make really when you're at the start of your project around which images you want to base your stuff on. And typically later on, changing that base image can be a good amount of work. And so I teach now as a part of this talk, this Node.js talk, and then this is all in the repo. It's a year old, so we're updating it, is how do I make a decision around what's the right base image? And there is no perfect base image. It is always a series of decisions that have pros and cons. And so your ultimate decision, if you went hardcore on security to make sure you had 0 CVEs, that may result in you having an image, for example, with Alpine, that isn't even officially supported by Node. And in fact, they consider it an experimental C library because it used Musel. Alpine is something I don't recommend in production or at all really for Node because it doesn't have that tier 1 level support from the Node team. So then you have to make decisions like, okay, well, how am I going to get 0 CVEs if I can't use Alpine? And so this becomes a more complicated discussion where you can maybe make your own custom install on top of Ubuntu. Or maybe you can do something I do, which is you copy the Node binaries into one image from another image, because we can do that now. And I can take an Ubuntu image and just copy over the Node binaries and libraries straight from another Node image. There's some negative effects to that too, which means CVE scanners typically don't pick up those files because it's not truly installed by a package manager, right? Then there are distro lists, which in them of themselves are not perfect. I don't actually like Google's distro list very much. I don't tend to recommend it. There's lots of negatives, especially when you're talking about enterprise long-term applications where you need to pin versions. You can't effectively pin versions in distro lists without doing SHA hashing, which has its own problems. And then the package managers, I mean, just don't get me started. A new game changer, I think, is the Wolfie images. The chain guard images officially is what they're called now, based on Wolfie. But they too have, maybe due to their success or maybe due to profit, maybe both, they have now changed it as well, where you can't pin to versions unless you pay for them. So you've got decisions. Now, if sky's the limit, you have all the money, I would be looking at ChainGuard, bar none. Like that's the way I would go if I was willing to sign up for a subscription to get those versioned images. I think they go way above and beyond any other image manufacturer out there. And if you weren't using ChainGuard, then my backup plan for you is slim.ai. Go check them out. And what they do is they'll take your image after you've built it, they'll analyze it and pull out things they don't think you need to help reduce CVEs, vulnerabilities. But that too costs money and has risks because it might accidentally pull out things you really need. I hear they're getting better. I haven't tested them lately, so consider that option. So you really have ChainGuard and Alpine and DistroList and all these other things at the beginning of your process, or you could just opt for use any old image you want, and then at the end, run it through Slim AI. Slim AI will then remove all the unnecessary stuff, giving you a truly slim image with hopefully close to 0 CVEs. So that's all in my talk next week. In case you're interested, you can already go today over and watch it from last year. It's going to have some updates, but if you're interested now, you can go check that out. Again, Node specific, but applies to so many other languages if you just replace the language. Gary's here. What's up? That's Q's back. The program is out. Yeah. So you can build your program over at DockerCon. And so you can sign up for free for virtual, and then you can go in and add things to your schedule. And then we are, oh, wait. Ooh, birds of a feather. Are we also going to have, let's see if we go to day. Let's go to Thursday. Nope. Okay, so they don't have hallway tracks, also known as birds of a feather sessions in here. But one of the plans for next week, if you're on my newsletter, you can sign up for that at bret.news. You can sign up over there at bretfisher.com. Just go to bret.news and you will get the newsletter. If you're on the newsletter, that's here, bret.news, you will know next week how to join me live at DockerCon. So I will have, hopefully, assuming bandwidth and everything works, I will have 2 options on Thursday. And if I just feel like it, I might go live on Wednesday. But my schedule is pretty packed. So we've got multiple events each day that I'm volunteered for. But my intention is to do a Swarm Fans meetup, which I will do live on YouTube. I don't think I'll do it live on Discord, sadly, just because I'm not sure how that's going to work. Like, when you're doing a live stream from your phone with remotes, wireless remoted mics, and you're streaming to the internet, like, there's all these concerns, bandwidth, following the chat, all that stuff. So I haven't tested that enough with Discord to figure out if that's a good way to do it. But the Swarm Fans group, I will definitely let you know. I will probably make an announcement in the channel right before we go live on Thursday so that you don't miss it. So sign up for the newsletter there. Get into the program. Sign up for free and fill out your program. So the in-person ones only just means they're not going to live stream them. Everything else is going to be live streamed. My understanding is I have no idea of the platform they're using or how this is going to work. I'm guessing it's not going to be YouTube Live. It's going to be something proprietary. I just don't know. We haven't heard anything yet. If you didn't know, by the way, this show, not these particular episodes. This is an announcement, by the way. Let's talk about something I'm working on. So for 4th quarter, so starting next month, I don't have an exact date yet. On the podcast, which comes out of this show, right now the podcast releases every other week, and it's guests. What I'm going to start doing is shipping every other week, just like in this live show, every other week is a Q&A. I'm going to start shipping not Q&As, because I'm not convinced Q&As would be great in an audio format because you're asking random questions. And a lot of times in these Q&As, the questions keep getting asked over and over, the same questions. So what I'm going to start doing is making new content about things that I'm talking about in the newsletter, things I'm working on, news, whatever I feel like is the topic of the week. And I'm going to start shipping those every other week in the podcast. So if you just went to bretfisher.com, you could find this podcast or links below. So if you miss any of the guests on this live show, they're obviously always on YouTube, but they're now going to be, they're on podcast format. And then we're basically going to be doubling up on the podcast, shipping double the episodes, one every week now. I don't have a date for when this is going to start happening, but stay tuned. We're planning on it. We finally committed. I know it's going to be a lot of work for me, but we're getting sponsors now. So in case you didn't notice, we've got sponsors on the show. So when people are motivating us with money, I can do more content. And by the way, that's a good time for me to say, become a member. Thank you for being a member. We have YouTube Live members or just YouTube members here on YouTube. You get exclusive access to special channels and a monthly meetup based on your membership here or on bretfisher.com or on Patreon. Some coming soon. I think we're going to do Discord ones. I haven't finished that setup yet. But however you want to be a member, it's like buying me a coffee every month, and you get to hang out in Discord, and then on a live stream, we do a special high fivers group that we just hang out, talk about projects we're working on. And so you get to be on video with me. It's basically like a Zoom call, only it's in Discord, so it's more fun. Mark maybe has a question. After completing the Docker Mastery course, I'm curious if the Docker DCA certification is still available. Is it a good thing to pursue? I'm between jobs and upskilling currently. Thanks. That's a great question, Mark. So let's talk about those certifications for a second. I don't tend to recommend the DCA. Docker doesn't yet have a new Docker certification. So if you look up Docker DCA, ironically, it takes you to Mirantis. So if you didn't know, 4 years ago, Docker split the company and sold all their enterprise business, and a vast majority of their employees all moved to Mirantis, which is a enterprise Docker and enterprise Kubernetes company. They also took over Swarm development and sort of maintained a lot of the Docker proprietary enterprise products. They sell a platform that is an orchestrator and is a combination of Swarm and Kubernetes. And so they are the ones now running the Docker Certified Associate exam, which is confusing. I agree. It is weird. Not Docker. So Docker doesn't have their own certification program currently. For years now, it's been at Mirantis. They have updated it. But in my understanding, it is, yes, a little bit about the open source tools, but a lot of it is about their enterprise solutions. And for that reason, unless you're using Mirantis in your job and their platform, then I don't generally recommend this, because you would have to learn their platform in order to pass the certification. And unless you're using it, why learn it, right? I would prefer much more if they had 2 levels of certifications, one that was generic Docker open source, Docker Compose, Docker Engine, those kind of things, and then a more enterprisey version. But they don't do that. As far as I know, this is just this one. I think they said they have a boot camp now. I didn't even know that. Oh, well, that doesn't exist. Training prep course, download the guide. So yeah, so this guide is definitely going to have some open source stuff in it. So Swarm mode cluster, and that's part of the challenge, right? Is like, if you're someone who just wants to learn the Docker basics and you understand, and you want to prove that you know how to build images, you run containers, manage networks, all the things that are not Swarm, this again isn't the certification for you. So it's going to have Swarm stuff and orchestration. You're going to have Kubernetes stuff in there, which is also weird because it's a Docker certification, not a Kubernetes certification. So the certification itself, to me, doesn't make sense. I'm not recommending it to anyone really anymore. And the only companies I think that would be, let me just back up. It's not going to hurt you, but if you're going to focus on certifications, this is the way I recommend. If you're someone who's if you're a software engineer and you're wanting to get more into cloud native tools, or if you are someone who wants to focus on the cloud native ecosystem or specifically the Kubernetes and container ecosystem, I think 3 levels you should go. At first, if you're really trying to certify everything and to prove yourself through certifications, then at first I would go and get a Linux and a networking certification. So, the Linux Foundation I'm not sure if they have networking. They probably do, but definitely a Linux certification to prove you know Linux. Because at any level, if I'm a hiring manager and other hiring managers I've talked to, if you prove that you know the operating system that you're likely going to be running on, and you understand through certifications that you understand networking, TCP/IP, that shows that you have a strong foundation and fundamental understanding of how this works, how this connects, how these things work together. And you may never need to be a Linux sysadmin, but if you understand the kernel and syscalls and file systems, like these are all core concepts, network interfaces, virtual interfaces, IP tables, like these are the kind of things that end up, people spend way too much time troubleshooting because they're programming something that's not operating correctly and then they don't understand how it operates. So do that. Networking, actually, to me, I think is even more important nowadays with everything being distributed computing. Every single application you're going to probably program or run is going to need something off server, something on the other side of your server, whether it's an internet service or something else you're running, which means you need to really understand packets, routing, subnets, the difference between a switch and a router, right? Most of us don't have to worry about this anymore. What's a broadcast domain even mean, right? These are all fundamental concepts that I think will absolutely serve you your entire career, regardless of your tech job, regardless. They will serve you. They help you troubleshoot your home computers, and when your Wi-Fi at home goes down, these are skills that all help you. So I always think that everyone needs those. I don't care what your job is in tech. After that, go get a cloud certification. Just one to start with, but go get one of the basic cloud certifications for AWS. If you're a Microsoft-focused company, or if you think your future employer will likely be on Azure, go get an Azure. But to me, if you don't know what your job's going to be, just go get an AWS cert, one of the basics. If you're going to try to specifically go to DevOps, they do all have DevOps certifications, so you can go there as well. After you've done that, then go get a Kubernetes cert from the Linux Foundation, right? If you want to go extra credit, you can get just the basic Kubernetes certification and then a cloud native certification there. And I don't want to, we can go through them all, but if you just go to the website, you'll see them. And that will prove that you know and understand the cloud native ecosystem and that you have some basic understanding of Kubernetes. There's multiple Kubernetes certifications. I don't really care which one you get. It depends on whether you want to be an operator or a developer. The certifications explain all that. That is the next level. I don't think that there's a Docker specific one worth taking. I'm not aware of one. It's a shame. But after you have that, I feel like that's enough. Like we're talking there 4 or 5 certifications, right? To me, that's enough until you want to specialize and go after a very specific type of job. If you want to go after, again, I said DevOps specific job, then go get a cloud DevOps certification, or go look for the agnostic DevOps certifications that are industry wide. There's the DevOps Institute that has one. There's a couple other options out there. But after that, the number one other thing you should do is fill out your GitHub profile and show us what you're learning on GitHub. Make a blog. Fill out your GitHub. You should be able to go to your GitHub and have stuff on there. And you can even put your resume on there. There's a resume builders on GitHub. You can, like if you go and find, I probably have a resume repo that's probably way outdated. So I have one in here that actually becomes a website. It's made from, let's see, where is it? It came from something. It's using JSON resume. There may be better resume builders now, but I built this, I don't know, 7 years ago, probably 8 years ago. So fill out your resume, make repos showing off what you're working on, and then make a wonderful little README at the beginning. I don't care what your job is in tech. I think this is absolutely essential. It is the best place to show off what you're doing, whether you're an engineer, a DevOps professional, an operator, whatever, IT pro. I think it's all valid because we all live in an open source world, and the very fact that you're putting effort in here means that you're understanding, you at least have some fundamental understandings of how open source and the internet works. Sadly, GitHub has a monopoly here. Well, for better or for worse. I love GitHub, so for me it's great. But it is the standard, and it would be weird to me if I was going to hire someone and they didn't even have a GitHub profile. I probably wouldn't hire them, honestly, because I just asked just today with Pro Cheeseburger, I said, hey, you've got this Swarm tool that you mentioned that you're using. That's great. Can you add it to the awesome Swarm repo? And if they didn't know how to update it, then I would be worried that they couldn't operate in our team, because in a DevOps team nowadays, we're using GitHub for all sorts of things that aren't programming code, right? We're putting all of our infrastructure as code. I'm putting all of our YAML in there for describing, our Kubernetes clusters. I'm putting in all of our TOML for Terraform. It's all going in there. So if they don't understand pull requests, if they're not using that for their own stuff, I'm really going to question their expertise. So that's the 2 recommended strategies: 3 or 4 or 5 certifications, and then go fill out your GitHub. I have, by the way, a link for this. This is Bret.show. I think it's just DevOps. So I have a long form answer to that you can go and check out. But that's a great question. We always get that question, and I always love answering it because I'm hoping, I haven't had anyone come back and complain about that answer. So hopefully you liked it. Oh, nice. Conrad actually agrees that you rewrote your Docker files for Ruby and Elixir following the Node.js rocks and Docker talk. Yeah, I mean, if I had all the free time in the world, I would just turn that talk. I would just rename. I'd do a find and replace on Node and Node.js and just replace it with Ruby, and then pip or npm package JSONs with gem files, right, and a npm with gem. And I would probably, if I just did that, I'd probably be 80 to 90% the same. I have not written up how to do Docker Swarm in 2023. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I can't do both, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to get more people on YouTube than we're going to get show up to Swarm fans in Discord. So I will make an announcement. Maybe I should put an event in there as well. I wanted to at least get on site and figure out if the internet and the lighting, the location, if all that's going to work for a Swarm fans thing, because we have to go figure out where the hallway track's going to be and if I can set up my camera and mics and how that would work. I've got 2 wireless mics, and if I keep passing them around to people so that when they're talking, it's technically recorded, I'm assuming that's going to be okay with everyone. Yeah. The last couple of high fivers but have only had a few people in them. So if you're in the high fivers group and you want essentially advice from a small group of people that are all doing this for a living, sign up for high fivers. You can sign up for the membership here on YouTube, on my website, on Patreon, and you get access to that monthly meetup that we go down rabbit holes of technical problems, technical solutions, what we're working on, what we're interested in. I really enjoy those monthly meetups. So I wish we had more people joining because I think they would all find it valuable as well. James is asking, does it matter which cloud you learn? Aren't most cloud tools multi-cloud like Linux, Docker, Kubernetes networking? That is kind of true, but not really true, James. So for example, if you want to run Docker and Azure versus AWS, completely different set of offerings. Because the reality is Docker and Kubernetes, you don't tend to run these yourself. Usually it's not my advice for you to go and create a new virtual machine in a cloud, install Docker manually, and run that manually. That might work for hobby projects, but when you are a very busy DevOps professional, you're going to be wanting to use the cloud services as much as you can so you can avoid maintaining your own Linux servers. The Linux server is becoming a utility that you only need as an exception. So the way I make a decision about running new processes on the internet is what services in my cloud can do this for me. That's the reason we have the cloud, right? We didn't just stop at the cloud 10 years ago or even 15 years ago and make a virtual machine and say, well, that's it. That's all we need in the cloud. There's a reason there's 175 services at Amazon. So I use those first because, yes, they're more money, but they're way cheaper than hiring another DevOps person to do that. And they're going to be better at it than me. In almost all cases, they're going to run databases better than I would. They're going to run S3 better than I would. And so I want to use their services. They have now at Docker, specifically at AWS, there are now 20 different ways you can run containers, and you should pick one of those, not do it yourself. In order to do that on AWS, you have to learn their services. You have to learn their offerings and have a mental model of when do I use which one. That's why you've seen multiple people on my show this year talking about that, all the different ways you can run containers on AWS. We should probably have one for Azure. I think we've had a couple people on that knew some of the different services. We had actually Brendan on from the Azure team, and we talked about the various ways to run containers on Azure. Those are different. They're all different. The way you set them up is different. The way you manage them is different. The different tooling, the different command lines, it's different. So you need to learn those after you learn the open source tools. So yes, go learn Docker, Kubernetes, and all these things. Learn the vanilla tools, but you're not going to deploy those in the cloud the same way. You're going to use the cloud services mostly, and the EKS is different than the AKS, right? You do have to learn the fundamentals. But what these tools are creating is an open standard. So we can now run container images across all of the clouds, but it doesn't mean the tools to run those containers are the same. It just means that we have the same formats, we have the same runtime. That's the standard. The Kubernetes API is the standard. but the way you install and manage Kubernetes in every cloud is different. So that's a great question. I probably should turn that into its own video, because that's a great question and a subtle difference between open source tools and open source standards and how the clouds implement those to, for example, on AWS, everything you do in Kubernetes and Docker follows their VPC rules, their security groups, their authentication systems, all these things that are AWS specific. They layer those around Kubernetes and Docker so that it fits their security model. And so you would have to learn those things on top of how to run containers in order to truly understand AWS. So that's why I'm saying, AWS is a majority of the market. It doesn't mean it's the only one you should learn, but you need to pick one to learn first. And if you're not already in a job, or if you're not targeting a specific job, then how do you know which cloud to learn? Well, you've never gone wrong in learning AWS. AWS is like the new IBM. There's always a saying back in the 90s of no one ever got fired for buying IBM, because they were so popular and such a monopoly in hardware that you were safe to just make that decision. AWS is the same way now. You're never going to go wrong with an AWS certification. You're never going to be left out of the decision pool because you only have AWS certification and not 5 clouds. I generally recommend people learn a cloud, like a single cloud at first, before they try to learn multi-cloud. A lot of companies think they want to go multi-cloud and then realize how really hard it is to truly go multi-cloud. It's hard to go multi-region, much less multi-cloud. So I don't, only the most advanced companies are truly multi-cloud, multi-region, and need engineers that understand multiple clouds all at the same level. Like, that's just not that common. It's only the largest companies. And those companies are going to probably, if you're new to all this and they're hiring you, they're going to hire you at a junior level, and then they're probably going to train you up anyway, because there's not a ton of people that have certifications in 2 or 3 different clouds, right? That's a pretty high bar to approach in terms of certifications, to have multi-cloud certifications. How do you optimize for local first, nearest first load balancing in Docker Swarm? Traffic? Maybe traffic. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I mean, granted, it's a discussion, so I don't have to have the answer, but that's a good question. Thanks, Martin. What is the best programming language for cloud, Python or Node? It doesn't really matter. Honestly, if you're saying pick a language right now and you're going to have to write in that language for the next 5 years and for the cloud, I'm going to say Go. I'm not going to say Node or Python, honestly. There's a reason everything you use in the cloud is written in Go or Rust now. Like if you're going to run Kubernetes and Docker, they're both written in Go. And if you're going to write, if you're going to look at more modern tools than that are even pushing the envelope of performance, they're going to be written in Rust. Obviously, there's other languages, and I'm not saying the other languages aren't great. But if you're going to make me pick a language, I'm going to pick Go. And I have way more experience in Node.js than I do Go. But I just find Go a better, easier language. It's just the standard library is fantastic. The ability to work in a team and the simplicity of the language allowing you to work together is great. But if I'm making websites for a living and it's just front-end websites, I probably would do Node. I mean, if it's a front-end website, it doesn't need a server on the back end, then. But Python to me is always something that I have made myself use. I have not enjoyed using Python. Python historically has been maybe one of the primary languages for sysadmins and operators. Obviously, it's big in ML, so I'm not trying to knock it, but They're from an operator perspective and the complexity of programming and all that stuff perspective. I don't just look at a language as like what are the language primitives that are great. I don't just do that. Why is my image frozen? It's like my image is frozen. There might be a bug. Let's see. Let's see if we can fix that. Yeah, somebody tell me if they can see me. Am I frozen? I can't even tell if I'm working. Can you hear me? I'm still talking. Oh, okay. All right, let's see if I can't fix that. Yeah, it appears frozen. Oh, it's always fun to troubleshoot live. Let's see. Are we back? Oh, that was Elgato. That was the Elgato HDMI. Well, thanks for having patience. So anyway, yeah, I would choose Go. If I had to choose between Node.js and Python, I would do Node.js all day long. And that's because I've been using Node.js since it was 0.6 back in 2010. Like, I technically probably have been using Python longer, but I have way less production experience with actually writing the code. And I generally don't enjoy the Python pip experience and the module experience, dependency experience of Python. Quite frankly, at this point, I don't even want to pick a language that would ever require I install a system dependency. I want a language that allows me to statically compile to a binary like Go and Rust, and allows me to avoid any host package manager. I think host package managers in containers are the devil, and that we should all be compiling to a very, maybe large, but a very large binary or a set of libraries that are all coming from our programming language compiler, and that is the modern and future way of running containers. But it doesn't mean old languages are bad or they don't work. It just means we've got a new set of rules on the internet and the way we're making software today, and the ways that we made software 15, 20 years ago when all these languages were invented it's way different. We have way different concerns now. We have different priorities. We have way more collaboration. Our systems are way faster. And that requires sometimes completely new thinking in how the tooling, not even the language, but the tooling around the language works. And a lot of these languages are too much, I think, their frameworks, their ecosystem, their tooling is all a little bit stuck in the past. For example, I just recently listened to another podcast, a great podcast called the Syntax podcast with, I can't think of it. It's Wes Boss, and I can't think of the other guy's name. But they have a great podcast, and I like to listen to it every once in a while about Node.js. And they're still, almost 15 years after we started talking about making a binary out of Node, they're still talking about how that can be achieved. And the advantages of that, of being able to ship binaries to your local file system and run things locally as local tools without having to clone a Node repo and install a bunch of packages and have Node install. Like, these are all really complicated concerns that modern languages have already figured out how to solve. And so once you've learned these things, it's mostly manageable, but we need way more developers than we have currently in the ecosystem. And how are we going to do that? We're not going to get that by making languages and tooling harder and more complex. We're going to need to do that by making things easier to do, easier to get started. And if you've ever taken a web course on how to get started in programming, oh boy, like there's a lot of tools. There are so many layers to the stack. It is so complicated. And so I appreciate these modern languages. I think someone learning Go versus something like Node.js from an ecosystem perspective, from dev to prod and all the things in the middle, just imagine how much easier that is if you can do most of your stuff in the standard library with a few other packages maybe on your first few programs with Go versus having to learn Node, JavaScript, NPM, all the complexities there, the packages management problems, the host packages you might need before you install Node packages. Like there's just so many extra layers of complexity there that I feel sorry for people that have to learn it from scratch. All right, I'm gonna have to wrap this up soon, so we are gonna rapid fire on the questions. Thank you for sticking with me through the problems. I'm assuming I'm back now, so I think Martin said I was okay. All right. A business idea for me to make a course on Istio, Certified Associate. Well, thank you. I have no plans to do that. Actually, I need to make that a little bigger, don't I? This needs to be bigger. It's hard to see that chat. Sadly, I have no plans to make an Istio course, but that is not a bad idea for someone else. Maybe you could make that course. Service Mesh is not my forte. I am a user of Service Mesh, but I would have to basically learn all the deep internals to make that course, and then I have to go sell it, and that's a lot of work. So I choose my courses nowadays very specifically based on how many people I think would actually buy that course, and whether I can charge good money for that course, and whether I know the content. Like I'm an engineer, right? So I'm not really a teacher for a living. I still feel like I'm a software engineer that happens to be teaching. So I can't just learn something in a week and then teach it. I really have to know the deep internals, which is why when you look at my courses, I don't teach things in my courses I don't know. Like I have to have production experience with it. I have, my latest course on GitHub Actions and Argo CD with Kubernetes. That's because I did that with multiple companies in production. I had to learn the mistakes, the best practices. So there's lots of courses you can take on Udemy where that person has literally never done that thing in a real business for profit. And that's not a bad thing. They're just really good at learning things on the fly and then reading from a script. I don't read from a script, and I don't learn on the fly. I have to go deep, and I'm just different like that. I'm just, for better or for worse, I would be a better course moneymaker if I would just make a new course every 2 months. And I'm just not that person. I need to be able to have this kind of conversation where we can dive deep and we can talk about the internals and how things really work and how to troubleshoot it and what to not do in production. That's just me. It maybe means I make less money, but I've tried to fake it, and it's not a lot of fun. I don't really dig it. But I really appreciate your ideas. I think Istio, especially the new Istio that we had on the show, go back a couple of months if you're new to this channel, Raj. If you go back 2 months, 3 months, we had a solo episode with Edith from Solo.io, and we talked about the new Istio ambient service mesh. I'm excited about that. I think that's the way to go. I would not be using any other service mesh right now, except for maybe the service mesh from Traffic. But I think, honestly, Istio ambient is the one I would use. I mean, I love Traffic's products. Istio is going to be more popular, and it's going to be a big winner in the marketplace just because it's completely open source. It's not open core like Traffic is. But I'm a Traffic fan. I'm a huge Traffic fan. I'm a Traffic ambassador. But I got a feeling that Istio is the one to know. Istio ambient mesh specifically. All right. What's the last couple of questions I'm going to get to answer? Yeah, Fernando on the camera. I think what it is just simply I'm on the latest Mac OS that came out 2 days ago because I love new things. I gotta have the new things. So Mac OS Sonoma came out 2 days ago. Of course, I upgraded the minute it came out, and I expected to have issues. So I've never had that frozen video before, and I use a hardware HDMI converter, and that's what froze. That's what froze. So I bet you it's a bug, and I'll probably have that problem for the next couple of weeks until everybody gets their bugs fixed. Restart Bret.yaml. That's right. Yeah. What do I think about Rust? Well, Gary, I talked about this earlier. I think Rust is great. If I had 2 languages that I could only have for the rest of my life, I would probably choose Go and Rust. Now with Rust, I only say that because I have tons of friends that are big fans of it, and but I've never, literally to this day, have never written a program that is used outside of my own laptop. So it is what it is, and I am, in order of understanding and expertise, I'm always an operator first. I'm a hobby developer. I don't tend to get paid to do development full time, so I give you this advice with a grain of salt. But I think that if you like Go, you might like Rust, and you might even like it better. There's a lot of similarities in terms of the tooling and the ecosystem around them. I like that they're both very much starting to focus on security, supply chain, statically compiled binaries, which is absolutely my favorite and really only way I ever want to deploy containers. But if I had to stick with any of the other languages, it would probably be Node. If I couldn't have those 2 languages, Rust and Go, I would do Node. But this, honestly, I'm so biased because I put a lot of decisions into it around the ecosystem, the frameworks, the number of frameworks, and whether those frameworks are updated and modern and easy to use, and the tooling and the way I package and deploy these applications. Those decisions weigh heavily on me, just like the program language itself. So unlike most developers that only concern themselves with the language, the primitives, the frameworks and ecosystem, I think of all the other tooling after that because I have to manage it end to end. So my decisions are usually a little more biased and skewed to the operations sides as well, much more than the developer side of that language. So, Alfredo, what's up? Hello from Brazil. Hello from Virginia Beach, Virginia. All right, last question. Could I make a course like the Docker for Node.js, but from a Docker captain with Python? No, and sadly, I won't be making a Python course. I have no plans to. I'm just not an expert in the ecosystem, and I think that's really what it takes to help people understand the tooling. A lot of my Node.js stuff you can apply to Python, and I have had some Python. I think I might even have a Python sample repo. Mostly dealing with pip and making sure you guarantee reproducible builds with pip by using special pip tools besides pip itself. That's where I tend to focus. The language is just the language. I don't really get excited about it, so I don't plan on making a Python course. But I appreciate your suggestion. I would say if you're really interested, just look at my Node.js examples and then just replace those examples with pip and Python executables, and you're going to get like 80% of what I would teach anyway. I have too many images and can't find the Docker file that I used to build it. How do I handle Docker files on your repo? How do you organize your files when building base images? Well, Docker files for me, this will be the last question, Dan. So you get the winner. Last question. All right, this is actually a good question. So hear me out. Docker files, if it's not a mono repo, if it's just a single application, the Docker file should always belong in the base. And unless you have one of these situations where, and I've seen this before, where you have a single application but multiple execution points where you need to run different commands to start up different parts of the app. I see this happen a lot in Ruby or languages where you have maybe worker processes that need to run. And even in those cases, I say it's one Docker file, multi-stage, and maybe you have 3 or 4 production stages where the command is different, or maybe you just override the command in your, Swarm or Kubernetes YAML. But you're building one image, just one. If you are in a mono repo, then your Docker files are probably going to need to be in the directory. Because I'm assuming in a mono repo, you've got one app per directory. Then your Docker file goes in the root of that directory, and you would build as such. If you didn't know, if you're using the latest Docker and the latest Docker build kit, this is why I love using GitHub Actions, which I have examples in my repo. All my examples are in my GitHub, including videos on GitHub Actions. With GitHub Actions, you get the latest Docker builds. And one of the things that I'm just going to throw out there is you can't find the Docker file that you used to build it. Well, the Docker history command can help you rebuild or know a little bit about that Docker file, like what built this thing. One of the things that I like to do if you have that problem with your Docker files is I throw in an environment variable or a label or both in the Docker file that I can put in information about where that came from. So like the version or the path can be an environment variable or a label. I prefer honestly nowadays to do labels because that's extra metadata that won't show up in the actual program itself. And so if you're using BuildKit on GitHub Actions, BuildKit already does a lot of this stuff where it will add labels and information about when it built it. And we now have the BuildKit by default. If you're doing it on GitHub Actions, if you're not doing it on GitHub Actions, just go read the docs about BuildKit provenance attestations. Okay, so those are big words, but provenance is the build information that happened when the image was built. Now, this happened this year. They've added this new stuff to BuildKit, and I think it should be in every image you build. If you do a full provenance, then that attestation, let's go look this up. So over here, this will be the last question really, but over here, if you look at the Docker docs, provenance attestations. So this describes to you all the new features where it not only will give you more information in your Docker image, in the metadata about how and when it was built and with what tools, but it will also, even if you do the full mode, the max, it says right here, if you do max mode, it stores the Docker file in the metadata. Now, you could always put your Docker file in your images. In fact, if you're not putting the Docker file in your .docker ignore file, that's a lot. But if you're not listing your Docker file in there, then that means when you do a copy of all your source code, it's copying the Docker file into your image. So you might be able to go into your image and just find the Docker file and see what it was when you built it. That can help you rebuild or figure out where that Docker file is. If you're simply looking for a file on your hard drive, go look up the tool AG. Silver Searcher. The Silver Searcher is my favorite. Oh, boo. Silver Searcher is my favorite tool. And so if I want to search for a Docker file, of course you can use the find command in Linux or whatever. But if I need to search files and find like that one Docker file, and I know that like I installed this particular thing, I can just do AG space the name of the thing in the file, and it will go search all the files in there as long as they're not in hidden directories. It'll by default just go find everything in the file. So I often will search for like a compose file that I can't remember what was in it. I'm like, what was that? Where was that compose file that had that particular example? I will just use AG from the command line to do that. And it's even got ways where you can filter it to say AG -- YAML space develop. For example, and so that would go look for any YAML file in any subdirectory that has the word develop in it. I'm saying that because the new Docker Compose watch command requires a section in your compose file for develop. It's called develop. And so I would search for that string and find the file with that example that I probably built 3 weeks ago, but I can't remember where I put it. So if that's your problem, that's that. But the provenance stuff is fantastic. I love that it puts more information in your image, and that you can basically reverse engineer the image. If you don't have this, if you're not doing this, the Docker history command can get you part of the way there because it will show each environment variable and each command run in the Docker build, it won't show all the other Dockerfile stuff. So Docker history is not a true Dockerfile replacement. Anyway, I don't know if that helps you at all, Dan, but I hope that that does. Sadly, I have to run because I'm taking a holiday for the weekend before I go to DockerCon. So again, just to remind you all, DockerCon is next week. I will be there and be running live streams multiple times throughout the event. The way you can know about that is to subscribe to this channel, click the bell so you get alerts when I go live, because it'll be here, and also sign up for my newsletter, Bret.news, or over there at bretfisher.com. Bret.news is where you get the newsletter, and I will send out an update next week on the plan and the schedule for things going on at DockerCon. I will also be sending out, hopefully the morning of the keynote, all the latest stuff from Docker, any new announcements of features or new tools that they might release. Hint, hint. If you want to know about all that stuff, get on my newsletter. Other than that, I am going to see you next week. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Bye.